Buddha and Nietzsche, a tale of two nihilists and their takes on the self. Most belief systems throughout the world are dependent on some sort of objective truth, be it the existence of God, the existence of an afterlife, or the functionality of the universe. It is from these objective truths that most cultures derive other things such as meaning and ethics. However, the problem with these so-called objective truths is that they are not objective at all, but rather subjective and something that are invented by humans in order to give our lives purpose and meaning. It is because of the subjectivity of these things that the philosophy of nihilism developed. Nihilism is a viewpoint that traditional values and beliefs are unfounded and that existence is senseless and useless. Derived from this is the notion that nothing fundamentally exists, and if nothing fundamentally exists, nothing really matters. Now, this has led it to be called an anti-philosophy, because philosophy is meant to answer questions, while nihilism simply throws the thinker to the wolves. Without an objective truth, how do we know right from wrong? How do we have a concrete sense of self if the self is not permanent, if we have no soul? Now, this daunting philosophy is intimidating to many, but was taken and ran with by two famous thinkers, Nietzsche and Buddha. Today, I'm going to tell you about their nihilisms and how they affect their ideals about the self. While both believe that the self is not inherent and that it is to be managed by the individual, they are very different in the fact that Nietzsche's ideal self embraces human nature, whereas Buddha does its best to suppress it. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was a cultural critic and professor, among many other things, who was born in Prussia in 1844. He was famous for his extreme cunning and was put at head of his department as a professor when he was still in his young 20s. Some of his most famous works include Thus Spoke Zarathustra, The Gay Science, and On the Genealogy of Morals. When he was 44 years old, he saw a horse being whipped, and in a fit of hysteria, ran up to the horse, embraced it, and collapsed. The rest of his life was lived in a sad state of senility. Now, in his early years, Nietzsche intended to be a pastor, as a majority of educated people did at the time. However, upon close examination and several moments of realization, he abandoned his faith in favor for Darwinism and atheism. Now, as a result of his lack of belief in the self and lack of belief in traditionally founded truths that were derived from creationism, he came up with the concept of Selbstüberwindung. Selbstüberwindung, or self-overcoming, is the idea that the self, because it is not created by a creator and is not given meaning from birth, is something that needs to be created by the individual. Meaning needs to be created by the individual, etc. Now, this individual, if doing these things properly, would be the Übermensch. The Übermensch, introduced in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is a psychological superhuman. They are known for being, or Nietzsche described them as being very intellectually independent, very non-fearful of human urges, and very earthly, not subscribing to any of the ethereal things that Christianity places great importance on. Now, it is important to know that this Übermensch was by no means supposed to be an extreme altruist. In fact, it was actually noted by Nietzsche that the Übermensch should not be afraid of violence, as violence was a key component of evolution, and as a Darwinist, he saw the objective of humanity to evolve further, which would involve great brutality, as evolution always does. Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama, was born in India into a Hindu family where he was set to be a prince. He lived in the palace in seclusion for years and years until one day he finally left the grounds only to witness suffering and death. He was shocked by this. As a result, he meditated on it quite a bit and did quite a bit of philosophical exploration. Today, his philosophical groundings have now become the widespread religion Buddhism. Now, the conclusion that he came to as a sage was that all of our sufferings came from the root of ignorance, which is a key component to that right there, which is the 12-link chain of suffering. The rest of the components of the chain are all key features of the human condition: aging and death, birth, the neurological mind, the body, etc. Now, while rejecting all of these things and avoidance is impossible because it is who we are, he developed the middle way. The middle way, or middle path, lies in between nihilism or self-denial and the belief of the self, or eternalism. Now, nihilism couldn't be completely gone with just because if you were 100% nihilistic, nothing would mean anything, and then there's no reason to do anything now, is there? And essentialism didn't work because it is grounded in the lack of truth, which is that there is great meaning in things. Therefore, Buddha saw it as the best way to recognize that there is no meaning, yet to behave sort of as if there was, in a very temperate lifestyle. It is from this that Buddha believed that we could relieve ourselves of all suffering. Now, one of the components of this was self-denial, a concept called the non-self, or enatman, or anatta. Here we see a quote by Buddha. A man asked Lord Buddha, "I want happiness." Lord Buddha said, "First remove I, that's ego. Then remove want, that's desire. Now you are left with only happiness." From that we can derive the fact that Buddha thought of the sense of self as being a source of suffering, and of desire as being such things as well. Basically, he stepped on the notion of human passions as being anything but being anything useful. Now, this idea is very well exemplified by the Buddhist monks that engage in the practice of setting themselves in flame and protest, as they do so without any regard for their own safety and with a bigger picture in mind. Yikes, look at that guy. Now, the comparison of these two is quite clear. Buddha, like Nietzsche, came from a very faith-filled background. Hindu India was pretty extreme, the caste system was pretty rigid, and in order to escape from this, he took away, or he removed from his mind and his philosophy all senses of objective meaning, and instead did one of creation. You create the self. Nietzsche had a similar idea. It's the self-overcoming. Basically, in their nihilism, they both believed that it was the responsibility of the individual to come up with their self. Now, for the eventual end of it, of creating an ultimately healthy human being. Now, where they differed was their vision of the self, their vision of the ultimately healthy human being. Buddha believed that it was someone who shut down all human desires and passions, as they were the source of all suffering. In doing so, you would have to embody great kindness and stoicness, never envying anything. Nietzsche, on the other hand, as a Darwinist among other things, was an extreme believer in human passions, human desire, envy, etc. In fact, one of the qualifications of the Übermensch was that it was someone who did not run away from their own envy and instead recognized it for what it was. Nietzsche viewed this denial of the self, the self-deprivation of Buddha as, funny enough, nihilistic. That's the word he used to describe it. He also referred to it as being life-negating, in that it negated the natural tendencies of the human being to an extent that he saw as being ridiculous. In conclusion, nihilism is an extremely relevant school of thought because at the end of the day, we as humans cannot prove there to be any objective meaning. We cannot prove there to be any right or wrong. Therefore, we have to come up with our ethical systems based on that assumption. as we are learning through the sciences that many things are actually objectively true. I see great value in both the perspectives of Buddha and Nietzsche. With Buddha, you can apply a sort of ethical code to live in the face of nihilism and avoid being a crazy anarchy guy who just runs around doing whatever he wants, claiming nothing matters, so I can do what I want. It also prevents you from self-abuse. Now, Nietzsche likewise prevents you from doing self-abuse, but also, and more profoundly, he gives this nihilistic reality kind of a spark of life, a spark of passion, a spark of meaning, because you create your own. Therefore, I think it's safe to say that if you are a nihilistic thinker, you should use Buddha as your moral compass, and Nietzsche to give yourself a sense of purpose and self. Also, the Buddha in you will keep the Nietzsche, the crazy Ubermensch in you, in check. Thank you so much for hearing this presentation. I hope that you guys actually watched this video, and have a good rest of y'all's year.